Hi learners, hope all of you are doing well, and after completing Chaucerian period, now we are going to discuss 15th century. So 15th century te ja important historical events gulo royeche segulo aaj amra cover korbo. I hope যে আগের যে ভিডিওটা রয়েছে চসারিয়ান পিরিয়ডের উপর সেটা তোমাদের সবার দেখা হয়ে গেছে। যদি সেটা দেখার না হয়ে থাকে তো লিংক ইজ গিভেন ইন দ্য ডেসক্রিপশন বক্স, প্লিজ চেক ইট আউট। সো আজকে আমাদের বিষয় হচ্ছে 15th century, important events of 15th century. So here I have 6 important historical events that you need to know, and always that I say that please clearly understand the background, the historical background, so that you can understand the literature of that time. Because these 6 important events are really going to be a helpful one to understand all the literary events of the time. So let's start. So here I'm going to discuss 6 important historical events, and একটার পর একটা আমরা ক্লিয়ার করছি বিষয়গুলো। তো প্রথম যে হিস্টোরিক্যাল ইভেন্টটা আছে সেটা হচ্ছে as we have discussed that 100 years war was going on. 100 years war was going on in Chaucerian period, and 100 years war is ending in 15th century. It's ending in 15th century. So 100 year war এ একজন খুব important personality ছিলেন. So who was that? She was a girl, and her name was Joan of Arc. She was actually a saint, a saintly figure. She was really a brave girl. She came out from the side of France, and she was actually helping Charles the Seventh. She was helping Charles the Seventh, and she did a great job that actually lead the French side to win the battle ultimately. So that actually lead the French side to win the battle. So she was an important figure, but in 1430 she was captured. একটা ট্রায়াল হয়েছিল তাকে নিয়ে, যাতে করে তার দোষ বিচার করা হয় এবং তাকে জ্যান্ত পুড়িয়ে মারা হয়। কত সালে? 1431 এ। দ্যাট ওয়াজ আ ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট ইভেন্ট। তো তারপর পরবর্তীকালে তাকে নিয়ে আবার একটা ট্রায়াল বসানো হয়, and in that trial she was found innocent, completely innocent. তারপর তাকে মার্টার, শহীদের একটা মর্যাদা দেওয়া হয়। Then she was converted into a martyr, and then ultimately she became the symbol of Catholic League. She became a symbol of Catholic League. এখনো ফ্রেঞ্চ যে মার্টাররা রয়েছেন, মানে ফ্রেঞ্চ যে সেন্ট ফিগার্সরা রয়েছেন, তাদের মধ্যে one of the top position is held by Joan of Arc. তো ফ্রেঞ্চ মার্টারদের লিস্টে বা ফ্রেঞ্চ saintly figures দের লিস্টে Joan of Arc is always there in the top. তারপর পরবর্তীকালে তাকে নিয়ে অনেক লিটারেচার বা পেইন্টিং তাকে নিয়ে করা হয়। So she was after that she became most important part of the literature, the texts and the paintings. So in the cultural field also she became an important figure. So that was Joan of Arc, and in the many paintings of that time we can find out her as a very brave figure. তিনি সেই সময় মাত্র 19 বছরের একজন মেয়ে ছিলেন। So she was only 19 years old, and she did a great job for France. Okay, so that was the first event, and after that we are coming into the second. So after the 100 years war, the British ruling family got divided into two. What was the name of the British ruling family? It was the House of Plantagenet. The House of Plantagenet সেটা কি হয়, দুটো ভাগে বিভক্ত হয়, House of York and House of Lancaster. And in these two houses the War of Roses began between these two houses. That was a civil war, and that was a very lengthy war. It took the time period of 1455 to 1487. So yes, a lengthy civil war that was going on in that time between House of York and House of Lancaster. So you have to understand the name here. The name was the War of Roses. Why the War of Roses? Cause that time House of Lancaster was represented by a red rose and House of York was represented by a white rose. So that's why the civil war was called as the War of Roses. House of York সেই সময় একটা House of York এর সিম্বল ছিল সাদা গোলাপ আর House of Lancaster এর সিম্বল ছিল লাল গোলাপ. That's why it has been called as the as the War of Roses. As a War of Roses. So that was War of Roses. But ultimately ki hoy that in that battle the main lineage came to end in both the houses. দুটো হাউসের যে আমাদের কন্ট্রাডিকশন ছিল তাদের মধ্যে মানে কিলিং মার্ডার এসব হচ্ছিল, তার ফলে কি হয় দ্য মেন লিনিয়েজ অফ দিস টু হাউসেস কেম টু অ্যান এন্ড, মেন লিনিয়েজটাই শেষ হয়। তার ফলে কি হয় অন্য একটা ডাইনেস্টি দ্যাট ইজ টিউডর ডাইনেস্টি দ্যাট কেম, Tudor dynasty came and captured the throne of England. Ultimately the third party that is Tudor dynasty ultimately came and ended the conflict, and in later part Tudor dynasty got attached to York, the House of York. So Tudor dynasty got attached to House of York, and that's how the War of Roses got to an end. That's how the War of Roses got to an end. So that was War of Roses, a civil war, and you have to understand the meaning of the name that is given, War of Roses, why it is called War of Roses, that you have to understand, and the time period you have to remember. So yes, that's all. And one more important thing that took place in mid of the century, that was also a really important event, and that you have to remember always. That was the fall of Constantinople, the fall of Byzantine Empire. So Byzantine Empire at the time, Byzantine Empire was really a powerful empire, as we all can understand from history. And what happened? We can go back to history and can find out that how Ottoman Empire came, and Ottoman Empire became the cause of the destruction of Byzantine Empire, and Constantinople was the capital of Byzantine Empire. So that's how a destruction of the entire era, you may say, cause critics now consider the end of the Byzantine Empire as the end of the Middle Ages. So in a way, the fall of Constantinople became the cause of an end of the era, and it actually gave a rise to the Renaissance. Byzantine Empire পতনের পর কি হয়, যে গ্রিক স্কলাররা ছিলেন, so they began to migrate from there to Italy. তারা মাইগ্রেট করে ইতালিতে আসা শুরু করে, and that was the cause of Renaissance. In that sense 15th century became the period of early Renaissance. 15th century became the period of early Renaissance, as well as the period of early modernism. So 15th century তাহলে আমাদের fall of Constantinople এর সাথে সাথে end of the middle age হচ্ছে, তার মানে 15th century becomes the part of end of the medieval era, as well as the part of beginning of the Renaissance age, and as well as the part of the beginning of the modern age also. So yes, thus 15th century becomes very, very vital, cause in that time we are getting the influence of medieval era also, we are getting the influence of modernism also, we are getting the influence of Renaissance also. Yes. So after that, I'm going to discuss another historical event that was also most important event of that time. And what was that? That was the invention of printing press. So invention of printing press, we all know that was done by Gutenberg, who was the main proponent of printing press in England. He was Caxton. Caxton brought the printing press here. Caxton established the printing press in England, and in few years it became a kind of revolution. Printing press brought the revolution in the field of education as well as culture. So it was a kind of overall development. Printing press হয়েছিল 1440s এ, তারপর 1476 এ ক্যাস্টনের প্রিন্টিং প্রেস এস্টাবলিশড হয় কোথায়? ইংল্যান্ডে। ক্যাস্টনের প্রিন্টিং প্রেস এস্টাবলিশড হয় ইংল্যান্ডে। So our next historical event is the colonialism. The beginning of the colonialism, and it was actually rising in 15th century, and it was at its height also. 15th century became a very vital period for discovery of the lands, the discovery of the sea routes, and for all the happenings of colonialism, because in that time Portuguese Empire, British Empire, all of them were trying to discover the new lands and trying to establish their colonies over there. So we all can understand the impact of these events. We all can understand the impact in our history of English literature. So in that time and in the later part of the century, we can understand that what was the impact of that colonialism that began in 15th century. So yes, so 15th century from that point of view also is getting more and more important to us. We all need to understand the historical background very well, so that we can understand the texts of the time, we can understand the literature of that time. So yes, now here I'm ending my video. I hope you all have enjoyed the class, and please let me know in the comment box that whether it was a beneficial session for you or not. So see you later in my next video. Till then, keep learning and keep growing.